Right, a very warm welcome. If you've just joined us, we're in Cape Town today, and the reason, well, yesterday the Minister of Finance delivered his first budget speech, and it was, I suppose, many have been saying that it was possibly the hardest one to put together in the democratic South Africa, and he had a lot of things on his table, issues to deal with in trying to put these figures together and balance the books, as it were. A sluggish economy around the world, South Africa's economy sort of limping along at about 2%. And of course, major energy challenge as well. But he did manage to put something together. And for some of you who are waking up and finding out news for the first time, you might find out that your tax has gone up by 1%. But what does that mean? And who does it affect, actually? So the man of the hour, let's find out from him and unpack that budget and what it means for all South Africans. Minister Nhlanhla, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to you.
Good morning, Peter. It is my pleasure to be with you today, and morning to the listeners and ladies and gentlemen.
All right, and also with us, actually, on the floor, because we've got a guest here at this venue, is Ayanda Alupade, who you see every single day, and she's going to be hovering in a number of tables. She's got a number of guests that she's already earmarked to have conversations with as well. Ayanda?
You're quite right. Thank you so much, Peter. Good morning. I am surrounded by a number of key stakeholders. I'm on the floor once again. And these stakeholders, Peter, will either provide clarity on the Minister's budget speech or perhaps even share their views and opinions. Some of the issues that we'll be looking at, the fuel levy increase and exactly where that money will go. We'll also take a look at labor-related matters. The Minister yesterday alluding to the fact that he hopes that the public servants' wage increases will be concluded sooner rather than later, hopefully before April, so that they can take effect. We'll discuss all that and more in just a moment, but it's back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Ayanda. Well, let's get into that conversation straight away. Minister, in simple terms, for Joe Soaps like me who don't quite understand issues like fiscal drag, what would you say was the main message behind your budget?
Well, perhaps let me start by indicating that, as we all know, budgeting is about trying to satisfy unlimited wants with limited resources. I think that's where the reality begins to assist us in understanding what it is that we're grappling with. And what is interesting is that in your opening address, remarks, you said you might wake up and find that your taxes have increased by 1%. You forgot to say by 1% only. I thought you would complete that part. But in order to do that, and you've also highlighted the challenges that we are confronted with. Therefore, the message is very clear. In order to be able to achieve that, of trying to meet unlimited needs and wants with limited and with unlimited, meeting unlimited needs and wants with limited resources. And they also are competing. So it's about trade-offs. So in order to be able to do that, there are two things we need to deal with that. And that's why fiscal policy question becomes important. You need to do something about your expenditure. You also need to do something about your revenue. And we did both. We had put out a package in October when we tabled our medium-term budget policy statement. That package recognized the reality that the difference between our expenditure and our revenue was growing in the negative direction. As a result of the challenges you have mentioned, be it global but also domestic issues. We have our constraints, but we also have the global situation, both at an economic and geopolitical level. And if you look at the picture, I met Trevor yesterday, and I asked him how it felt putting together in the early years, because I thought it must have felt exactly the same with the challenges at that time, because we had a country that had inflation in double digits, a deficit at 9%, and all those things. And I said, it looks like we're back there almost. He said, no, this is worse. Yeah, so it's now trying to get an understanding of everyone that we need to pull together in order to address this challenge. Some of us have to take the pain, some of us have to be a bit patient, and some of us have to actually understand that our role in implementing the National Development Plan in order to address these challenges is to do what each one of us is required to do. Business, private sector, and civil society. The National Development Plan talks about reducing the cost of living for the poor, reducing the cost of doing business, and also an active citizenry. So who doesn't have a role? We all do. So in this budget, we actually tried to call upon all sectors to come together and do precisely that. Small business, government does what it can, and that's found in the package. The private sector, larger corporates, the stage is open. Government, we have a role to play. We need to constrain our expenditure because these are public resources, and we need to be seen to be doing that. And civil society, I also mentioned that they need to be patient, but they need to work with us in also building our economy in order to address this. And I think that would be the message from me. It's not a short message; it's a very long message because it does require that we get into it. Fiscal drag, when we do that when we increase the interest, the taxes. There is something that we do every year that protects people's incomes from being eroded by inflation. Remember, we have a progressive tax regime. If you move on to the higher tax bracket without us expanding those brackets in order to almost leave you at the same tax rate, you are immediately impacted by moving into a higher tax bracket which will tax you more than you were paying, and then you will not realize the benefit of your increase. So that's what we were doing. So protecting that your incomes are at the heart of our tax policy, and therefore even the 1 percentage point, we saved people lower down, and combined with the fiscal drag, it's actually even less than 1 percentage point.
All right. So just to put it in a language, I guess, that people understand. So it's essentially everyone above 15,000 Rand a month, the tax has gone up. But if you're earning under 37,500 Rand a month, you've got a net tax decrease, actually. So it's only above that. Yeah. But I guess what that means is, are you taxing the rich to feed the poor?
Tax, the simple principle with tax, it's about fairness, and fairness has to do with being able to afford. You don't tax a person who cannot afford. So because you can afford, then that's when it kicks in. It's fairness, equity, and also redistributive.
All right, so I'm going to put my Joe Soap hat on, and I'm going to start to. As I said, he's reading the paper this morning on his way to work, and he's going to hear my grants have gone up, social grants, which is great, but they're less than inflation. So in real terms, I'm not better off.
I don't think that is true. When you want to look at that, and that is why I said we are still going to be looking at, particularly with the child support grant, and old age grants. When we propose these increases, we look forward to what the inflation outlook is. And chances are that our inflation is likely to actually remain at the levels at which it is, or even slow down. So we're going to take that into account going forward. But when you allocate resources again in an environment like the one we're in, you also take into account, looking back, we've actually been giving increases which were much higher than inflation. So you also need to average that up. Because all we're trying to do is to protect that. But also with social grants, one thing you do not want to do, you do not want to make social grants more attractive than getting into active economic getting actively involved in the economy by working or by doing something for yourself in order to sustain your livelihood.
All right, and then the other thing is, so you give with the one hand, but you take away with the other when you start saying, look, you're going to pay more for electricity, you're going to pay more for fuel. I end up with a net negative position, don't I?
It's the other way around. You take with the other in order to give with the other.
Okay.
It's not because you can't give what you haven't got. So this is now the balance. That's exactly precisely what fiscal policy is about. It's actually about redistributing what you have. And some of the things, if you look at the electricity levy, if I were just to touch on that one, it's not even about raising revenue, because you will see also in that one. But let me first complete this point, that it's not about raising revenue, but it's also about changing behaviors. Because in a constrained environment of energy, it is important that we discourage excessive use and incentivize efficient usage. So you will see that there is a levy being introduced, but also we increase the incentive for efficient use of energy. So that's where the balance is. But if you then turn to the issue of raising taxes, when I was coming here, I was listening to someone who was saying we missed an opportunity to increase VAT. It just shows how differently we look at things. I would want to believe that the person who says that was the easy route, it's a person who actually speaks on, only represents his own interest and forgets the regressivity of the VAT, but also that not necessarily meaning that you shouldn't go there, but meaning that there are other things to take into consideration, including what impact it will have on the economy at a particular time. And that is why we've left the debate open in that space. And a lot of people have been saying that. And I was saying, perhaps if we had gone for VAT, we would be hearing a chorus of people who are saying, why not PIT? Because those people can afford. And that's the dilemma we find ourselves in. But I would want to believe that what we did is in the best interest of the nation and would benefit all of us.
All right, okay, so those are the first thoughts of Finance Minister Nhlanhla, and we'll continue to explore those other elements of his budget speech, and don't forget it's 1% only, and we'll be back after this exploring more with the Minister and some of our guests here, and we'll take a look at some of your questions that you're posing via Twitter at Morning Live SABC. Stay with us.
There are places some are afraid to go. Discussions some are afraid to have.
Leave the house. We're not going to say anything further than this.
But some have the courage to open their eyes. To go to those places, have those discussions.
You're pulling at least 18 hours a day?
Because sometimes perceptions need to be altered.
It's been dubbed the trial of the century.
And when you get to a press conference,
they were hoping that would stem the tide.
Stories need to be told in a language everyone can understand.
Once you have religious power, you can abuse people.
But they have got benefits. Free marijuana.
I can only hope that you media, you hear these things.
Everything you might have been afraid to ask, but need to know. SABC Current Affairs.
Technology is all around us and is improving lives across Africa, like how young Nigerians are connecting to the internet. There are doctors finding new ways to save lives in Cameroon, and the South African public transport system that is now getting Wi-Fi. We have gadgets, apps and loads more, some of which play a big role in Africa's growth. A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. To find out a bit more about social media and technology news from here in Africa and abroad, join me, Phumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC News.
the session musicians, you want a particular sound on your record. Who do you get? Abo Butemp, Abo Victor Masond, Abo Godfrey Mqina. So these are the people who play a very, very vital role in making us.
The South African Horror Fest is the only inclusive event of its kind over Halloween season. It screens a host of exciting horror or thriller movies from around the world.
Shoshani achieved stardom when she won a live music competition in Namibia titled Last Band Standing in 2012.
Join Musa Mkhalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
After?
After, but the next break.
Okay.
Get some questions in now.
Right, welcome back. If you've just tuned in, this is another one of those New Age business briefings brought to you by the SABC. And today we're talking about the budget that was announced yesterday, that was presented yesterday by the Finance Minister, Nhlanhla Nene. And we've just been chatting about some of the issues that came through and some of the headlines that you're going to be reading this morning. And I've got to be honest and say that I guess one of the things that you're going to have to do is think about another perspective of some of the headlines that you read, because it may be a glass half full or half empty. But I'll leave that for you to decide what your thoughts are. Let's go to our audience here, and don't forget we look forward to your tweets as well, and you can put your questions to the Minister. We're going to start at table, I think it's table number 3, and it's Zola Besetti. Table number 3.
Thank you, Program Director. Minister has introduced Zola Besetti from KPMG. In your budget speech yesterday, you mentioned the introduction of a savings account, which I would like to understand, who's actually going to be contributing to that, and also once you contribute, how is it going to benefit on that? If you can elaborate a bit on that, please. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So for the sake of time, if you could be brief but comprehensive.
Again, that's a very difficult one, Peter. The tax-free savings account is an account that we announced much earlier, but we still had to work on the modalities of its implementation. It now comes into effect, where we actually are going to be. It's a way of incentivizing savings, which, as a country, we've been saying that we are not saving enough. But the concern or the argument you were getting was that how do you save when the little you save is all subjected to very high bank charges and is also taxed in the end. So it allows space for people to get into that. We've created a vehicle for savings that would actually be protected from taxation up to a particular limit. I just don't have the numbers with me here, but it's a tax-free savings which is open to all, but with protected returns.
Some people are saying when they compare it to other countries like the UK that the amount is not a lot. Could it have been more?
You start from somewhere.
Okay.
And exactly as you said earlier, when you spoke about a half-empty glass and a half-full, but you just forgot one glass. Okay. The optimist would say it's half-full, the pessimist would say it's half-empty, the realist would say it needs a refill.
Okay. Table 13, we've got Dr. Manas Bapela. Table 13, Dr. Manas Bapela.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. First, just want to compliment the Minister on sticking to the promises of the medium-term budget statement in October. Just following up on that, I would like to know if any details at all you could provide on the assets to be sold by the government to assist ESCOM. Thank you very much.
The best detail I can offer is that it's a non-core state asset. Look, process is well advanced, but when it reaches that point, it is at its most sensitive stage. So some of these things are market sensitive. It would not be prudent to actually be saying, this is where we are at deleveraging. But the purpose, as we said, we are also looking carefully at where the state needs to be in order to serve the public interest. Where is it that the state should not be in order to allow the private sector to play its part? This has got a number of, connotations. Some people call it privatization. But in some instances, it's where the state is invested and it doesn't make sense to be invested there. So it is the state being in the private sector itself. So if the state moves out of where it is invested in the private sector, do you call that privatization? Because the state is consolidating its area of investment in the interest, in the public interest, and moving out of where it should be allowing competition, because being there does also not give the state any power to change anything where it's located, other than also just benefiting and getting dividends like everybody else, and playing into the space that it should be regulating instead of instead of regulating that space, it's invested in that space, so it can't even regulate it in the interest of the public. So it's an important area that we are looking at, even just more broadly than just the financing of Eskom. But here you have an ailing state entity that is tasked with the responsibility of providing energy in the country, both in the interests of business and civil society. I was saying to Peter earlier here, what we also, the other thing that we lose is that we still have about 3 million South Africans who are still not connected to the energy grid. If you leave that in the hands of the private sector now, having not completed that task, I don't think that it would be responsible for the state. And therefore, it is important that we do have Eskom, but open up as we move to the private sector also to play its part. And therefore, that's about the detail I can provide. I hope it explains what a non-core state asset is.
All right, so that's Eskom. Will we see that happen in other areas, not just Eskom, but other areas where government perhaps is playing a role, and you're saying maybe we should get out of telecoms, maybe? Who knows?
Well, I cannot divulge that at the moment until we have made a determination.
All right, I know that Ayanda has got a guest, and let's just find out who she's talking to and see what the conversation's about. Ayanda?
Thank you so much, Peter. Yes, you're quite right. Let's hit the road now and take a look at aspects of the budget which directly affect motorists. Here are the figures. South Africans will be paying a little over 80 cents more a litre for petrol, and that's because the general fuel levy went up by, or will be going up by 30.5 cents a litre from the 1st of April. And then, of course, there's the road accident fund levy, which will increase by 50 cents a litre. Now, let's get some clarity on how this will affect Gauteng road users. The issue of e-tolling, Peter, still very topical at the moment. It's still up for debate. I do understand deliberations provincially in Gauteng have been concluded. They've been sent up to national. But the question is, with the increase in the fuel levy, how will that impact on e-tolls? And I know that the Deputy Minister is one of my victims this morning. I've asked her to just stand by so she can give us some clarity regarding that. I'm joined by the Deputy Minister in the Department of Transport, Umama Usindisiwe Chikunga. A very good morning to you. If I may ask you, just please stand for us, and our camera is right over there. And I believe most people in Gauteng will want to know now what the situation is regarding e-tolls in light of what the Minister had announced yesterday.
No, thank you, Ayanda. This fuel levy has nothing to do with the e-tolls. It has everything to do with the Road Accident Fund, which procures its fund from the fuel levy. So it's just about that. And it's the money that the RAF uses to compensate victims of road accidents. And it stands there and it ends there.
So from where we stand at the moment, e-tolls here to stay?
The e-tolls, in fact, the tolling system or the user pay principle has been with us here in South Africa since 17,000, when the governor of Cape Colon decided to collect funds in order to repair roads. And we then had the modern tolling system or user pay principle introduced or established in South Africa in 1983. The user pay principle is in South Africa is still going to continue. But on the issue of e-toll in Gauteng or electronic tolling system in Gauteng, the Deputy President is actually seized with that responsibility now.
And I do believe there'll be an announcement that will be made soon.
I think so, yes.
Thank you very much for allowing me to ambush you. Let's leave it there, at least for now. But yeah, that fuel levy increase coming at a very opportune time. We have been experiencing a decline in the price for petrol. So it came at a time where perhaps the minister was able to maneuver somewhat when it comes to the fuel levy. We'll leave it there, at least for now. More after the break. Stay with us.
Let us go to this dollars issue, dollars eventualis and dollars director. What do they actually mean to the ordinary man in the street?
A practical and easy example of dolus eventualis is where two robbers walk into a bank with the intention to rob the bank. They reconcile themselves that should the teller press the panic button, they are going to pull a trigger and kill. So the intention is not to kill, but the intention is basically to rob the bank.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Technology is all around us and is improving lives across Africa, like how young Nigerians are connecting to the internet. There are doctors finding new ways to save lives in Cameroon, and the South African public transport system that is now getting Wi-Fi. We have gadgets, apps and loads more, some of which play a big role in Africa's growth. A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. To find out a bit more about social media and technology news from here in Africa and abroad, join me, Siphumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC News.
The judge slammed corruption in both the private and public sector. Referring to irregular and wasteful government expenditure, he said it could no longer go on.
The high-profile corruption scandal has dominated Spain's headlines in recent weeks, the scandal touching a nerve as Spain emerges from its downturn after a slew of corruption cases involving politicians and the king's sister.
Tourism is a vital part of the economy. It contributes about 5% to the country's GDP and is a significant contributor to various industries such as food production, retail and transport.
For all your business news, stay tuned to your favorite channel, SABC News, at 1 Monday to Friday.
Good morning, back from the Johannesburg studio. I know we're coming live from Cape Town, but we're monitoring what's happening here on Twitter and all the questions that are being asked from around the country. And thanks so much for sending all of them in. Let's read a couple of comments and let's get some questions across to you now, as we've got the Minister as our guest here. This is one coming from Seretse. Seretse saying, please ask the Minister, are there any plans to cut interest rates to accommodate the increases from his budget speech? Seretse, I'm sure I could answer that one for you. I'm not sure that the Minister is going to be cutting interest rates anytime soon, but I will leave that to the Minister. I'm certainly not the Minister of Finance here. So interest rates anytime soon, can we see a cut happening? Here's another one coming in from well, this is just a comment. Nkanyiso is very worried that with the child support grant increasing, they're seeing girls rushing to have babies to earn a salary monthly instead of rushing to get an education. That's a concern from one of our viewers out there. Here's another one commenting and saying, this is Molefe, saying, I agree it was one of the tightest budgets ever, but almost half of the things were expected to increase. So I think viewers really not surprised by some of the announcement. Many were expecting a lot more to come out of our pockets, unfortunately. Somebody asking a question, Tandu Tulu, saying, can you explain why KwaZulu-Natal gets so much of the chunk of the budget? This is one of the questions that's being asked. So I think if that can be another question. Again, John Jackson asking, why the large disparity between KZN and other provinces? Surely those who contribute are not meant for KwaZulu-Natal only. So there's one. And then finally, Khotso writing into us and saying, did the Minister and Treasury effect all these increases to cover for the repayments of the e-toll debt? Khotso writing to us at Morning Live, SABC on Twitter. If you would like to write in as well, please do. Well, let's go back. Perhaps the Minister can address some of those questions for us. Peter.
Leanne, thank you very much indeed, and a warm welcome back. Yep, a lot of questions coming through on Twitter, and let's address some of them. I know the first one, you're not the Reserve Bank governor, so interest rates is not something you have to worry about. But I guess some of the things that you do, you've got that at the back of your mind.
Well, you are correct, Peter, that the interest rates is the purview of the governor of the Reserve Bank. In as much as I wouldn't want him to comment on on fiscal policy, I restrain myself from commenting on monetary policy.
So that's the end of that.
Yes.
Okay, so all right, so these grants have increased, and we've seen it in other countries. In the UK, I saw that as well, where you create a welfare state and you give people things, grants to help them, but they start to get abused when you give them too much. And they're worried that girls will start getting pregnant just to get these child grants rather than actually trying to get careers.
Yeah. That's precisely the dilemma that we're confronted with. Whilst poverty levels are high, inequality being at the levels that it is at, and unemployment being at the levels that we're at, and coming from an era where the rest of the population was completely excluded from economic participation, it is important for government to address this, and the only way you can do that is through social grants. But I also agree that the focus should not just be on grants. It is for that reason that even the increases are as moderate as they are. You asked the question earlier about it not even compensating for inflation, and I did indicate that we're actually just also trying to deal with the moral hazard. It is when these grants are abused that it becomes a problem. But also, I think we should disabuse ourselves of this notion that anybody could actually fall pregnant for 300 rands.
You'll be surprised with this stuff.
It doesn't cost you 300 rands. Then perhaps you must qualify the mental state of that person. If you say a person falls pregnant because he or she stands when falling pregnant, he or she still applies. So, but again, I must say, a lot of people who benefit from this are people who are deserving. But we do have people who abuse it in a number of ways, in that even utilizing that money for the upkeep of children who continue to remain poor, perhaps with the elderly, who actually have to share their meager pension payments with those kids, whilst the parents who actually who would actually be getting paid but leave them with those people. So there are a number of abuses, including people who would actually take that unwise decision, which actually doesn't pay off at the end, because if that was the reason, I think it would be completely misplaced and unwise.
All right, KwaZulu-Natal, why do they get so much of the budget?
Is the suspicion perhaps that because I come from there?
Hey, we don't know.
I'm not too sure. We in this country we have what we call the equitable division of revenue, not the equal division of revenue. It is equitable because it is calculated. There's a formula of calculating the allocations, but there are also other ways. You know, we also announced that we've now got this with the grants, the incentivizing of provinces and municipalities that are able to spend their resources, that are able to provide credible plans. Because we want to encourage people to plan properly, we want to encourage all spheres of government to spend efficiently and effectively and deliver on the services. So I don't think it is correct that KwaZulu-Natal is getting more money. And the last question was also saying that perhaps we should allocate all what we raise to Gauteng, because that's where the electronic tolling system is.
So, but this fuel levy and this road accident levy, is some of that going to help SANRAL sort out its debt drama?
The Deputy Minister gave a very accurate and precise answer.
Okay.
This is intended to deal with the victims of the road accidents that are funded by the Road Accident Fund, which at the moment is actually in quite a dire situation, because it is close to 100 billion rands in the red. The only concern we have there is that the bulk of that does not go to the victims. It is for that reason that there is legislation being prepared in order to address that issue, so that the money that we pay to the road accident victims goes to the victims rather than paying the middleman.
Okay, let's go to our tables very quickly. I'm going to ask three people to stand up one after the other, ask your questions very quickly, and we'll get quick answers for you. Starting table number 4, Luca David Msoma, Professor.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Very quick, sir.
I would like to ask the Minister if the Minister agrees with me that cultural and economic development are twin-allies in national advancement. If so, how? If not, why?
Okay, and then table 18, Aubrey Mthethwa.
Hi, good morning, Minister. Directly to you, you spoke about yesterday township economy. I think someone commented around that. I want to know, how are you going to do? How are you going to direct the funds to ensure that the township economy is working, profitable and successful? Thanks.
Okay, you've got about a minute to answer both of those questions.
Thank you. And both of them very difficult, if I were to say so. Cultural and economic development, Prof. I think you must get your students to write it. It is indeed, but it's an interesting point you are raising, and we actually do not always associate economic development with the real people. So cultural development has a lot to do with, as somebody was saying, because I come from a rural area, and if I explain to people, I always try and relate this to my environment. I relate it to, if I want to explain an amount, I relate it to the value of cattle. And if I want to explain the issue of putting money aside for your retirement, I always relate it to putting aside seed when you harvest. So some of those things, we actually bring them to the fore and say how best the two actually talk to each other, because it cannot only be for the elite that when we talk economic development. This is for that reason that I think there should be a particular focus also in our areas in areas where the economy is like a strange word. But it goes back to the origins of trade itself.
And the township economy?
Exactly. Township economy, is, simply put, is that it's an area that I don't think we've paid adequate attention to, and there are opportunities in the townships because we've got, in the first place, if you look at the cost of doing business in the urban areas, and what it would cost you to establish a business where the people are and deal with the special patterns of the past, you actually would be able to create an environment where there is economic activity in the townships, which is beginning to happen as we speak, but I think we just need to give it a little bit of support.
All right. Well, Minister, we're going to have to say thank you very much indeed. I know that you're going to be talking to our sister broadcaster, SAFM, shortly, so we want to thank you for giving us this time, and we wish you well with this budget in the year ahead, and we look forward to chatting to you at half-time. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for your time.
Thank you, Peter, and your listeners and ladies and gentlemen. It's about implementation.
Right.
The real work begins when we get to the execution of this budget.
Okay, so that's the Minister of Finance in Nhlanhla talking to us about his budget yesterday. After the break, we'll be chatting to the Deputy Minister, Mcebisi Jonas, as well as the Commissioner for the South African Revenue Service, Tom Moyane. Stay with us for that and more.
After 8 o'clock, you're watching Morning Live on SABC 2 and Channel 404. It's lovely having you with us during this special broadcast where we've had the Finance Minister with us this morning. Well, let's just review what's happened. The majority of political parties have criticised the Finance Minister Nhlanhla increase of personal taxes in his budget speech, but the ANC has welcomed the move. The Minister admitted that responsible choices need to be made amid challenging times. Tabling a 1.3 trillion rand budget, Nene announced that taxes as well as fuel levy and electricity tariffs would all go up in April. He said higher growth is possible and even crucial in order to stabilize government finances. To boost growth, government will be focusing on supporting less energy-intensive sectors, including tourism, agriculture and housing construction. Nene gave the assurance that government will do its best to save money. But with GDP growth expected to reach only 2% this year, he said tax needs to increase.
Leanne, thank you very much indeed. Yes, the conversation continues. The budget very much focused on how our lives are going to change. Some are waking up to a new tax environment, and that's why we've got actually with us the Commissioner for the South African Revenue Service, Mr. Tom Moyane. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to this second part of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us to this important gathering this morning and to the viewers at home.
Okay, and also one of the co-authors of the budget is the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. Mcebisi Jonas. Also, this is your first time on this track. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and to your viewers at home also.
All right, so just now, Leanne was saying that the opposition parties criticised the budget, and I guess they have to say something, but they were saying... that's not a dig. They did. But they were saying, and they were going on about the tax hikes. And I'm just wondering, is there another way to look at these tax hikes?
Look, I mean, I think you're right, though. I mean, opposition has to say something. Otherwise, there's something wrong with democracy. But if you look at the substantive issues really about what we're really trying to do, on the one hand, I think you have an economic slowdown, that our economy is not growing at a pace at which it's supposed to grow. Therefore, you have a scenario where revenues are low to the state. And secondly, I think you must also contend with the reality that demand for government services is on the rise, as it were. And therefore, you have to continue spending and to give spurt to economic growth and development on the other hand. At the same time, you have to manage that spending, hence we're putting a cap on the spending. But equally, all those measures combined, you still have to ensure that you protect revenue and increase revenue to support most of the work that we're doing. Otherwise, without increasing revenue and increasing what government is doing, you are unlikely to give rise to economic growth and development. So it's a hard choice that any country has to make at a particular point in time.
So I even heard one leading economist suggest that this isn't a growth-friendly budget. What would you say in response to his accusation?
Again, it depends, what he understands by growth. But I think the aim of the budget, we're very upfront, that it is a consolidation budget. It is a budget that seeks to stabilize fiscus in a very tough environment. It is also a budget that seeks to start addressing some of the major constraints for growth in the economy, in infrastructure, in skills, in addressing the electricity constraints, etc. So it is indeed a phase that we have to go in. We said it's a 2-year program that seeks to stabilize fiscus and consolidate fiscus, but at the same time ensure that we begin to create platform for growth beyond that point.
Commissioner Mayane, we heard that 14.7 billion of what you had hoped to collect in tax revenue became a shortfall in the end, and this was one of the reasons that prompted the tax hikes. The question, I guess, is part of that is the economy and the challenges there, but what else as a revenue collection system could you have done to bring in more of that money? We heard about transfer pricing, illicit flows of funds and that sort of thing. What else can you do to plug that gap?
Well, I think the Minister and the Deputy Minister have set the pace and the tone that this was a consolidation budget on the backdrop of tight and difficult economic conditions, both domestically and internationally. And therefore, we, as the Revenue Service, being at the end of the value chain, charged with the responsibility of collecting as much revenue as possible. But if we take that as a premise that the economy is not performing to its ultimate level, and therefore one would be able to correlate that whatever we collect at the end of the day is a factor of what the conditions are in the economy. But certainly when we look as to what are the areas wherein we can possibly generate more revenue, it is to look into some initiatives. One, look at the issues that have been spoken so much internationally, profit shifting. Profit shifting, simply put, is that countries are declaring their taxes in tax jurisdictions where the tax is low, and therefore not benefiting the economy in terms of what they are supposed to pay in the country where they are operating effectively. And that in itself erodes the tax base, and also snuffs off or deprives South Africans of the possibilities of increasing the social spend on areas where it is necessary. We must also bear in mind that the revenue that is collected by us as the tax institution helps at the end of the day to help the government to consolidate its social needs, but most importantly for domestic investment. So those constraints, given the broad picture, if the economy is not performing, we also it has an impact at the end of the day as far as the revenue collection is concerned.
The Minister also talked about helping small business and some of the reliefs that came through. Businesses turnover below 350,000 won't pay tax. But I'm just wondering, there's businesses that sort of hover beyond that. And I'm just wondering, from where you're standing now, are there people that are going to under-report? How are you going to manage, especially in a high cash environment where transactions are done using cash? They're going to keep their income levels below 350,000 because they know they don't have to declare tax.
Well, let's put it this way. Small economy in any thriving economy like ours is big business, as the President said in the State of the Nation. It is important, therefore, that we start also helping the small emerging business people in our economy in order to stimulate growth, also increase the patterns of employment, which, as we know, that we have the highest unemployment rate in South Africa. Be as it may, from a revenue perspective, in the township economy in particular, where cash economy is thriving, we need to be more innovative and see that when they declare the taxes, we're able to measure those as we go on. But it's going to be a tall order in the sense that we need to be looking as to a new means of enhancing and putting into the net those small business enterprises into the tax breaks that the state has been providing them. The issue of under-declaring is criminal by its nature, because it does not provide what you call tax morality. We need to deal with tax morality here. So we are going to be on the roadshow, where we'll deal with the three key principles. One is education. Secondly, is providing efficient and effective services. And finally, there's an issue of enforcement. But we would not like to use the latter, enforcement, because if you have not given the small and emerging business people the opportunity to understand the importance of tax and their role in the economy, then we'll be failing in terms of the mandate for which we have been put into existence. So there'll be a huge drive in terms of doing tax education to the small and medium enterprises to understand that it is cool to pay your taxes, and therefore and see that those taxes that they pay to the state, they will also be able to help them to grow, to become big players in the market. Profit shifting, as I've indicated, is a big problem internationally. It's not only in South Africa. So the multinationals per se, as we speak, we need to send a message that if tax morality is not becoming something that is a mantra in their ethics, certainly we'll use the enforcement leg, which is what is disposable to us within the Act.
All right, I'm going to go to the floor just now and also get tweets. But I guess another big thing for you is this review into SARS governance by a judge. How did SARS get to this point?
Yeah. Well, I would leave that to the Deputy Minister, but certainly it's a most welcome decision. Suffice to say, the Deputy Minister will be able to give more prominence as to the importance and why that had to be.
Or is it affecting your ability to collect revenue and do the job of SARS?
No. On the contrary, it is strengthening the issues of governance. Bear in mind that any institution which testifies to the high ethics, we all know that SARS has been given a top-notch performance indicator that it's one of the best performing institutions of state, and therefore the image and the brand of SARS has to be maintained at the very highest level. And for that reason, with the issues that have been in the media, it is important that we don't damage or erode the image that we have, that the taxpayer still must have confidence that what we're doing is within the parameters of the law.
Deputy Minister, a judge. This is pretty serious.
Look, I mean, if you look at the SARS Act, the law, it provides that the minister and the commissioner can set up a committee to advise them on tax administration. And that's what it's advising on. It's not advising on tax policy or anything else. It's set up basically, essentially, to strengthen governance issues, as the commissioner had said. But it's also looking at, in terms of the operational environment, whether the operational environment is compliant to law and regulations of the country, and also to set up mechanism for strengthening tax administration in the country.
How worried are you about what's going on at SARS?
Look, I mean, it's organizations, I mean, let me just start off by saying that all revenue collection organizations will always have an investigative capacity. So, I mean, that's standard. I mean, otherwise you won't be able to collect revenue if you don't know from whom do you collect revenue, on which basis. So it's a fundamental thing. The reason why we actually decided to set up this thing is to ensure that that is never abused. And that's what the judge must look at. Governance structures, how do you strengthen that and ensure that it's compliant to law and it's used for what it's intended to do. So it is probably a more forward-looking initiative as opposed to a backward-looking initiative. The Commissioner is doing a good job in terms of stabilizing the institution, focusing it on its work. In fact, there is stability in SARS, and performance is still very high.
All right, very last question on this. Will you be able to work with the people that you've suspended when everything is done and dusted?
Well, I think that we should leave to the labor relations issues. I think it would be unethical of me to make comments to that effect. Certainly what the Deputy Minister has indicated that SARS is operational. SARS employs 15,000 plus. They wake up in the morning dedicated to do what is expected of them.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be hearing from someone called Wesley Fester, who's got a question for our panel. Stay with us, and we're also looking at your tweets as well. Still in Cape Town and still having this very important conversation about yesterday's budget, and my guests at the moment are the Deputy Minister of Finance, Deputy Minister Mcebisi Jonas, and also the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, Mr. Tom Moyane. But let's take a look at some of the questions that are coming through, not just from you via your tweets, and we continue to look at those, but also the audience that we have here. And we start at table number 16, where we'll find Wesley, is it Fesker?
Yes. Hi, good morning. I'd just like to know, how do you guys intend getting the allocated resources to the people on the street?
That's it?
Allocate the resources.
Say that again, how do you want to allocate?
How do you intend getting the allocated resources to the people down on the street, those that we intend using resources for? Because the biggest complaint we have in this country is that there are resources, but they don't get to the intended people.
Okay. All right. So, in fact, let's answer that question now, because it's quite a big one. You've got a budget, you give it to a department, you give it to a province, you give it to... How do we make sure that the guy on the street benefits from these allocations?
Okay. Look, I mean, most of this, I think we should start off from a planning perspective. Most of these budgets from departments are a product of a very intense planning process, I think, and therefore some of the implementation issues are included in that process to look at how they get implemented. But in addition to that, I think government has moved very decisively to intensify and strengthen monitoring and evaluation. Because again, I think you've got to ensure that our monitoring and evaluation systems are stronger. We're able to detect misuse of government funds early and respond to them, and the potential for misuse in that sense. We have also, as Treasury, introduced expenditure reviews. Because again, it's not just a matter of resources reaching the intended beneficiaries or projects. It's also a matter of whether the projects themselves add value in a sense. So the expenditure reviews are aimed at ensuring that we look at what departments are actually doing, but also to ensure that we look at what is the impact of what they are doing. It's an evolving system, obviously. I think we are better than what we were a couple of years ago, and we're sophisticating the system as we move along, and it will probably at some point be stronger and more perfect. If you ask me, is it perfect? I'll be the first to say it is not. But added to this thing is that we need to ensure that the population is the eyes also. But sometimes people will say that there is a lot of corruption in this place or that place, but nothing is done, and they never report it to anyone. So there's a kind of active citizenry.
Are there consequences, Deputy Minister, because the Auditor General has been measuring and evaluating for years and years and years, and the issue really is, are there consequences for non-compliance?
Yeah, there are. I mean, if you look at the growth of the number of cases that government is handling in terms of people who didn't comply or people who have broken the law. The number is growing, which shows that I think there is a very decisive response to these factors. Again, I must say that if you ask me, is it adequate? Definitely not. I think it's something that we must begin to strengthen as a culture within the system, that for every wrong there are consequences.
Okay. Table 20, we're going to find Sefale Monsizuma.
I'm over here. Good morning.
Okay.
Thank you. My question is actually related to the previous question, so I will ask, would you elaborate a little bit on how you're going to improve efficiencies and accountabilities in the spending of the money in the same way that we have efficiencies and all of that in the collection of the taxes?
Okay. I don't know, maybe that's a question for you as well, the collection of the taxes, improving the efficiencies in that process.
Well, let me say that the collections or collection of revenue and taxes is a factor of how companies perform. But I think at the core of what we do, there's a very important and very fine line which would refer as tax morality. Whether people feel that if they don't pay tax, they feel confident of what they're doing. The issue of tax morality at the core, it therefore calls on people's consciences and business people or individuals to be able to do what is statutorily required of them. It is very difficult to enforce it. But at the same time, as we see it as revenue services, where there is deviant behavior, we'll go for those individuals and companies that are not paying their taxes. But as I've indicated, as a factor of the growth of the economy, and as we give it to the state to distribute it equitably to meet the requirements of the social needs of our people in South Africa, that is determined by the number of people who come forward. But certainly the other issue that we want to put forward is that there may be cases, unintended so, who people may not have paid their tax. We as a revenue service provide them with a window of opportunity to give them what's called voluntary disclosure, declaration of their taxes. And that's an amnesty which cannot last for too long, because you cannot allow that to be abused in the system. And that in itself helps, therefore, that the fiscus is directed to institutions which are in need. That's where we come in. In terms of enforcement, we want to believe that that's the last resort we would like to be involved in particular.
Right. So, Deputy Minister, here's the thing. I want to pay my taxes, and I will. But the taxes are supposed to do things for me. So I guess Joe Citizen is driving and his tire bursts because he hits a pothole. And then he picks up the newspaper and he reads billions in irregular expenditure, and it's almost as if my taxes are financing government corruption and inefficiencies.
Look, I mean, it's very clear that I think there is a balance that we need to strike. And we are indeed striking that balance, ensuring that I think we improve efficiency in government, we deal very decisively with corruption issues, we address some of those basic needs like infrastructure, roads, etc. And I must say that I think if you really look at the extent to which public investment has been increasing in those critical areas of need, you would actually realize that government is doing everything in its ability to address those issues. So expenditure management is a critical component of the game, and as Treasury we take that very seriously in our day-to-day business.
Okay, all right. Ayanda, I know that you found someone else now on the floor. Who are you talking to now?
I go and talk to my next guest, let me just quickly read a tweet. You had mentioned a little bit earlier that we would be reading tweets. Yesterday we received a tweet from Biggs Mfuiwa, who wanted to know whether or not the finance minister would be alluding to this next fact. I'm going to read his tweet. He says, "Can you ask the gentleman from COSATU," at that time it was Matthew Parks, who had joined us in studio, "can we expect anything about public servants' salary increases from Minister Nhlanhla Nene?" Well, let me give you the answer. The minister did did touch on it, albeit very lightly. He spoke about the fact that although there's an increase in personal income tax, public servants would benefit from wage discussions. Let me quote him: "We are also mindful that public service salary negotiations have yet to be concluded, and we hope an agreement will be reached in time for salary improvements to be implemented in April." Now, part of those negotiations, Congress of South African Trade Unions. I'm joined by the Western Cape Provincial Secretary of COSATU, Mr. Tony Ehrenreich, now to discuss the processes and the procedures in those wage discussions. Mr. Ehrenreich, if you can come a little bit closer to me, I promise I won't bite. Thank you so much for your time. Now, it's a known secret that many of our public servants, your teachers, your police officers, are debt-ridden. They are in a very precarious position because they earn too much to qualify for RDP houses. They earn too little sometimes to qualify for bonds. Their children don't have access to NAFSIS because of their pay scale. Talk to us a little bit about the negotiations to adjust the salaries of your public servants.
Thank you very much, Ayanda, and good morning to Comrade Minister. I think the issues are no doubt absolutely important for workers and the working class, but it goes towards the context of the budget. We have a slowdown globally, so we're not going to be growing our economy on the back of the global economy. It's got to be grown on driving up domestic consumption. And the only way to drive up domestic consumption is to make sure there's more pockets in the money of consumers and the bottom of the end consumers. And these are the workers that we represent, including the public servants. So the government and the budget has to respond to what the president identifies as the triple challenges. When the inequality levels in South Africa increases, that must tell us that we're on the wrong trajectory at the policy level. The budget must be the vehicle that we're able to mitigate those difficulties within the society. We haven't seen the budget do that to the extent that's required. And if the budget doesn't do that, then we're going to see the issue of redistribution in the society dealt with at the wage negotiations table. So if the budget doesn't talk about adequate increases for public servants, it doesn't talk about a minimum wage, it doesn't talk about the real increases for pensioners and people on child grants, then we're going to see that being expressed in other ways. And so we've got to ask the Minister, how do we ensure that we intervene in a way that we bring about greater levels of inequality? Because the wealthy got huge tax cuts in the first decade of democracy, and we've seen that taking the country in the wrong direction. We've got to respond to that, and the budget is the main tool. So how are we going to go about doing that, lest we leave it to a point where wage negotiations are the vehicle in which the redistribution of the wealth and the resources in our society is dealt with, and that will lead to crippling strikes that none of us want in the economy at this stage. So the government has the opportunity to address that, and address that in a meaningful way with the budget. Thank you.
Just before you go, still on wage negotiations, you touched on it in your answer, the issue of the national minimum wage. There has been much talk about it. We do understand that there is some sort of gathering to try and move it forward a little bit more. Are you confident in the powers that be that this is probably imminent for South Africa?
We certainly think that the statement by the Deputy President has been really instructive by saying we have to have a national minimum wage. The poverty wages that so many workers in our country continue to earn is not sustainable, and it's not what we want to use as the basis for reconstructing our society. So the discussions are continuing. We're trying to get an agreement on the quantum of what that minimum wage represents, but I certainly hope that out of the budget announcement and out of the further engagements with government, that we'll find the point where we can be sending a signal to all workers in this country that we're going to be setting a living minimum wage so that people have a decent standard of living. And we should also stop these kind of statements that says that young women are having children to access the grant. 10 Rand a day must be absurd. So people who make those statements are completely insensitive to the desperate plight of our people. Nobody's going to have a child for 10 Rand a day. Our social security system is an absolute minimum, and it doesn't go anywhere close to dealing with the real need of people. For old people to survive on 1,400 Rand a day is just not sustainable. We've got to look at that area of the society and give them decent increases so that in their twilight years they can have a decent standard of living.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for having joined us. Well, there you have it. A tough juggling act it was. It was often referred to as well as a mixed bag of tricks. Nhlanhla Nene, the finance minister's budget speech announced yesterday, and he had to be all things to all men, so you might save some. Some say he achieved just that, but others maybe not. But let's leave it there for now. Quick ad break. We continue after this.
and we're still continuing our conversation on the budget that was presented yesterday by Minister Nhlanhla Nene. We've got the Deputy Minister and the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service as our guests for the last 25 minutes of this conversation. And we're looking at your tweets and we've taken questions from the floor. And there's an interesting tweet that's come through from Johan Rousseau, who says, what is government doing to regulate a 200 billion rand funeral industry that's evading taxes and that's not registered?
Wow. It's a very difficult response to provide, but certainly, like any other revenue services anywhere in the world, our prime target is to have all the taxes paid. But certainly we keep our eye on the ball with respect to the registrations of such companies through our sister organization in the DTI, and therefore link that to the banks. But as time goes on, we need to also to up the ante in terms of compliance mechanisms that we need to put in place. Certainly, if such issues are detected in the process, the Revenue Services is empowered by the Act to collect as much revenue as possible for those individuals who are avoiding tax. But if that's the premise that the gentleman is saying, we will also put our microscope and binoculars on this industry. But similarly, it also happens in any cash economy. To regulate and be able to follow the cash transaction become very difficult. But we cannot hide behind the cash transactions as a difficult proponent. We also provide as a backup technologies that allow us to see whether these monies have been put into some use somewhere. Bear in mind we have the other institutions, the FSB, we have the FIC, the banks have a statutory requirement to declare monies that are being banked, large amounts of money, and that helps us to be able to monitor the cash flows that are moving around. But certainly as a revenue organization, we want to put as much effort in providing the taxpayers and the people of South Africa that we monitor and we're at the top of our game.
Okay, all right. Table number 1 is it Mfuneko Toyan? Table number 1. Okay, you have a question.
I do. Good morning, Minister, and good morning, Commissioner. It's Mfuneko from Reuters. I just wanted to ask, especially to Minister Jonas, your scenario modeling suggests that if the electricity crisis worsens, our GDP could slip as low as 1%. Do you feel that if the situation gets really bad, that we're in any immediate danger of slipping into a recession? Thanks.
Okay.
Look, I mean, I think what probably didn't come out very strongly, and if you read the budget review, it's more explanatory in terms of what government is doing in relation to the electricity situation. There are a number of initiatives. I think at the base of it, the first one is stabilizing Eskom, because I think if you don't stabilize Eskom, you have problems down the line. And part of the stabilization of Eskom relates to how do we improve the maintenance of existing capacity, because which is like historically one of the critical problems that we've encountered as a country, underinvestment in maintenance and very poorly managed maintenance program within Eskom. The second part obviously relates to looking at other means of increasing generation capacity in the country. Again, the number of initiatives that government is talking about are currently underway around cogeneration. We're also looking at a whole range of other measures. I mean, there's IPP program which seeks to increase generation capacity. But there's a third element of the work that we're doing. We believe that as a country we are very inefficient when it comes to energy. Actually, I mean, studies show that we are almost as inefficient as UK, for instance, which is a bigger economy, and you would expect that would actually, in terms of energy efficiency level, will be lower than that. So we need to address the issue of energy efficiency across the economy. Again, there are programs and measures that are being undertaken by government to address all those issues. If you take all of these measures combined, I think, and you would actually come to the same conclusion that we have come to. It is unlikely that we might fail to address these issues. just on the basis of the programs that we have and the partnerships that we're building between industry and government and all other stakeholders in society.
All right, talking about energy, Temba Majola raises an interesting question. So you've got this tax on energy to promote efficient use of energy. Is there going to be any incentive for people who go off the grid electrically?
Look, I mean, there are a lot of programs already that are working towards that. I mean, where you're encouraging people increasingly to use renewable energy as a mechanism for generating energy and meeting their energy needs. A massive program of government is already underway in that regard. I mean, the IPP programs last time, it was massive, I mean, what we had. There are initiatives now, I mean, to be driven by the Department of Energy to look at how do we take certain parts of the country off the grid by different mechanisms using renewable energy or a combination of means that you have. So it is definitely within the program of government.
Table 5, is this David, is this Mellencamp? Say that? Metlecamp. I thought you were Johnny Cougar Mellencamp and you were going to sing a song.
Hi, good morning. My question is more for the Deputy Minister. What is the National Treasury's outlook for the price of Brent crude until to the end of the year? And are these taken into account when adjusting fuel levies, for example? Because if we see Brent crude going back to $80 a barrel, say by the end of 2016, the petrol price is surely going to get back to $100 a barrel sort of level. Thanks.
Look, I mean, we've taken a view that there's still huge uncertainty about where prices of oil is going. So the modeling that's happening in Treasury now, fortunately I'm looking around the technical guys in Treasury to respond, but the modeling that's going around, it's taking into consideration the uncertainties in the market, certainly. So obviously I think over time we might have to revise these things based on the evidence emerging out of the market.
One question that's come through, and I don't know who can regulate this for us. When the petrol price goes up, our taxi drivers charge us more. When the petrol price drops, the prices stay the same. What do we do?
The Deputy Minister of Transport is gone. It's something that I think we probably have to deal with as we go on. I think it's one of the difficult challenges.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the end of that one. Okay, table 24, Sipo, is that Tira? Table 24.
Thank you. My name is Sipo Tira. I'm from Sanlam. My question is for the Deputy Minister. With regards to the tax-free portion on the savings account, will that be permitted to increase annually, or will it be capped at the 30,000 per annum where it's sitting currently? Thank you.
If I wanted to respond by saying just the details will be announced on this thing so soon, so I wouldn't want to preempt that process.
Okay, so you'll have to wait for the announcement. Talking about savings, you're encouraging South Africans to live within their means and save. But government doesn't have to do this when we look at this budget deficit drama that's playing out. Why does government play it under different rules?
Look, I mean, if you look at the level at which we're cutting government spending, 25 billion might look very small. It is real. I mean, those in departments will tell you that the measures that were undertaken to cut down government spending are massive, actually. Although at the moment they are focused on non-cost spending, but it's very clear that, I mean, they are very effective and people are feeling them within the system. Definitely they are not adequate. We need to intensify them, strengthen them, sophisticate also the monitoring mechanisms around that, I think. Coming back to the thing about saving, you know, one of the problems I think we have as a country is that if you look at families, generally I think poor families spend more on transport, on health and on education, etc. If you look at countries similar size economy elsewhere, people don't spend as much on those issues because our system, public system, works very well. And I think our challenge when we talk about improving education and health, public health and public education. It's precisely actually in a way to deal also with the problem of saving, because once you have a very well-functioning public health system, a well-functioning public education system, and there's confidence and credibility in the system, people will start actually taking their children to the public school, as well as transport. If our public transport system operates very well, it actually contributes to saving, because then people start using the public facilities, as it were. So there is, in a sense, sometimes we are attacked on social spending. There is, in a sense, a very strategic reason why you should grow social spending, but also you should improve the quality of social spending, because it has implications on household savings.
Okay, all right. More of this conversation right after this. Stay with us.
I'm so tired.
A little bit earlier.
All right. Well, Ayanda's busy trying to chat to the guests that she has. Let's see who she's talking to and what they're talking about. Ayanda?
Thank you so much, Peter. Yes, a little bit earlier you alluded to a question that wanted to know about why it is that when petrol prices go up, so do the taxi fares. But when the prices go down, the same doesn't happen for the taxi fares, which got us thinking about public transport. And if you're one who uses public transport or you keep up to date with the issues related to that, you'll know about Moloto Road. It's an infamous road. A number of road fatalities have taken place there. So I want to bring it into the fray when we talk about infrastructure development spending in regard to the budget speech. Now, let's speak to someone who's very, very involved when it comes to Moloto Road and wants to know a little bit more about what the development there entails. I'm joined by Nixon Dlamini. He's from RVIP. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity. The budget speech yesterday mentioned Moloto Road, and there's been some funding that's been allocated to improve this road in terms of road safety and so on. But I think one thing that crops to mind is this area includes places like Kwaggafontein, which for a history that we won't go back into at this moment. The locals sort of term it as a labor reserve. Now, I think it would be quite prudent for us to understand whether this allocation includes the social benefits as well in terms of just lifting up the area. So in terms of just having a road developed, is there going to be a corridor sort of development where there's an infrastructure, or is there going to be a railway line, etc.? Because we really don't want to have people moving from all these rural areas to the cities, but rather there should be some sort of distribution. So based on this funding that's being allocated, I think it would be quite prudent to have that considered as well. Thank you.
The relationship between social development when it comes to infrastructure development on Moloto Road, or that stretch of road there. Something also connected to public transport, the use of broadband and Wi-Fi on taxis. We know that's something that's been mooted and has been tested in one or two areas. So let's bring Dr. Clive Finn in the equation now to speak to us about the development of broadband and what you would like to have some clarity on.
Mine is rather a question than a position. And primarily my question is, there's the whole issue of broadband that has been spoken about. And those of you will know where I come from, given that I'm speaking about broadband. And the real question is, in the present budget, although it was referred to in the SONA part of the address, in this budget, the budget was rather silent on it. And yet it is one of the primary drivers of the economy going forward. I would like to know from the Deputy Minister specifically what his thoughts are and why the budget was silent on this particular matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Deputy Minister, it's all yours.
Okay.
Okay. On the broadband part, I think if there is a program, I think part of this, the advice I'm going to give is that when you read the minister's speech, it's always important that you read it in conjunction with the budget review. Because in the budget review, the details of what needs to happen is contained. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's written there on broadband. And essentially, I think, a couple of weeks ago, government took a view that says that we need to almost rationalize, consolidate all the agencies operating in the ICT space. Part of the reason for doing that, obviously, is that there is a realization that sometimes we duplicate inefficiencies in the system, resources get wasted, and actually we work at cross purposes. So there's an initiative now to look at broadband infraco, even telecom, and the whole range of other players in that space, consolidate them. The reason for doing that, I think, is that government has adopted a very broad program, broadband infrastructure implementation program, that it has adopted as part of the strategy that we're working on. And in the budget review, I think there are a bit of details around what needs to happen. But part of that is ensuring that we not only deal with the backbone, broadband infrastructure backbone, but also we look at all critical areas in the country have access in terms of broadband.
We're under time constraints, so I'm going to basically say to you, read the budget review, my brother. Okay, all right, we'll be back right after this.
Art is a personal expression that evokes a flame from within.
Street art, it's a vast concept.
Dancing is one of the main art forms on the streets of Africa. Regardless of how it is done, the streets remain expressive. A passionate artist in the central business district of Johannesburg.
Yeah, I've been doing this it's been 7 years or 8 years now.
Brains lost control on what to do then. Words dispute in the mouth of a woman.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Stand by, everyone, stand by. Right, welcome back. We're closing up here, but there's a couple more questions, and I'm going to ask Deputy Minister just to answer very briefly. I can't get to Bronwyn Peterson, but she asked a very good question. Can we have tax-free industrial development zones like Saldanha on a smaller scale in municipalities? And Richard Mukasa says, is there a stimulus tax reduction plan for companies that seek to promote SMEs in South Africa? Sibusiso says, Chinatowns, VAT, tax, forex.
Look, the whole industrial strategy in the country, I think, does a couple of things. I think through industrial zones, you know that there are certain packages incentive packages that we provide around that. There's a huge discussion going on now, because if you look at most major centers in the country, everywhere, you see old industrial estates disappearing very fast. Macman in PE, in other areas, in KZN, in Limpopo, everywhere you see these things. We are looking at what can we do to incentivize growth and development in those areas. There's a huge discussion happening within Department of Trade and Industry to say, how do we manage and block the degeneration of old industrial estates? And it includes some of the questions that are raised around specific incentives.
We're running out of time, but very quickly, are you going to help businesses help SMEs?
Already the program that is run by Small Business Department is aimed precisely at ensuring that we have a system and mechanism of incentivizing industry to support small and medium enterprises.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it, unfortunately. Thank you very much indeed to Deputy Minister Mcebisi Jonas, Deputy Minister of Finance, and the Commissioner for the South African Revenue Service, Mr. Tomoyane. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we wish you both the very best in the days ahead. Ayanda? Gone. All right, so that's it from us, actually, from behalf of Ayanda and myself. Have a great day, everybody. Let's go back to Johannesburg and Leanne. Bye-bye from Cape Town.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks to your guests, thanks to everybody that attended the breakfast briefing as well. And of course, thanks so much to Ayanda for being there. That brings us to the end of the program today. Oh, have I lost my microphone?